Joining me now, our livestock marketing specialist, Derrell Peel. Derrell, over these last couple of years, we spent a lot of time talking about drought, talking about short term and how we survive that. I wanted today to talk about the long-term situation for cattle producers. Let's talk about the trends that are happening in the industry.
Well, I think as we move past the drought, hopefully, and think about a little bit longer term perspective, there's a couple of things that cattle producers need to keep in mind, and really we can think in a couple of different time periods here. I think, you know, for the next 2 to 4 years, we're going to be caught up still a lot in cattle numbers, the limitations that has on the industry. And then longer term, I think there's even more fundamental structural change that's taking place that'll go out at, you know, at least a decade, if not longer than that.
Well, let's dig into those time frames. Let's start with the 2 to 4 year. What do we really see happening there?
Well, again, we're at historically low numbers, or almost historically low numbers. The drought the last 2 or 3 years has pulled those numbers even lower than we anticipated. So this whole rebuilding process is going to be a real challenge, just biologically from the standpoint of available numbers. But from a market standpoint, it means that rebuilding is going to be an expensive process. And I think what cattle producers need to keep in mind, obviously they're trying to recuperate their forage resource in many cases. They need to take it slow from that standpoint, really, for what's best long term for the forage. And at the same time, the markets are probably going to dictate that we need to kind of take it slow in terms of rebuilding herd numbers. So I think producers really need to give some thought to what is the 2 to 4 or 5 year strategy here for rebuilding their herd and their business relative to what the drought has left them with at this point in time.
All right, let's take that a little further then and look at, say, maybe a decade out. What do we see happening then?
The other thing that's really changed in our industry the last few years, of course, is this fundamental change in crop values in this country. Obviously, we've got more demand for grains in this country, more demand for corn, for industrial use, as well as growing global demand that I think will be the long-term backdrop that's going to be there. That changes the way the cattle industry works, in a sense. We evolved over many, many years in an environment where we had cheap feed grains based on cheap energy to be what we have become accustomed to thinking of. In an environment where long-term we have permanently higher grain prices, that means that this industry has some incentives to rethink the whole production process and be a little more forage-oriented and a little less grain-oriented. That has implications not only for how the feedlot sector works and so on, but it has a lot of implications back down to the cow-calf level as well.
All right, well, that's very interesting to think about, but then for the producer day-to-day on his operation, what does that mean? How does he put some things into place to be ready for all that?
Well, I think there's some fairly specific things producers can consider. It's going to depend on individual circumstances, certainly, but we've already said that rebuilding will be a slow process in terms of the availability of animals, the availability of forage, and taking care of that forage resource. At the same time, this change in economic value, if you will, for forage relative to grain implies more opportunity for things like stocker production in conjunction with, say, a cow-calf operation, or maybe it's a case of utilizing more retained ownership. In all cases, the idea of rebuilding the cow herd more slowly and utilizing stockers or yearling cattle in some seasonal sense might be very complementary in terms of what's best for the forage resource, what's best economically in terms of rebuilding, and where the value in the industry really is. So I think there's a unique opportunity here to kind of do the right things. And really what it suggests is that cow-calf producers maybe need to change their mindset from thinking about how many cows do I run or how many cows did I historically run, and really put more focus on where do I generate the most value in this operation. It may be with less cows and more of other things in conjunction with that smaller cow herd base, things like retained ownership or running some stocker cattle in conjunction with that, where there's increased value now relative to the forage that they really produce.
All right, good information and plenty to think about. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.